Hello, welcome to A-Star Demola. On today's lesson, we are going to be going through the cardiac cycle. Really pivotal topic for A-level biology, so we're not going to waste time, we're going to get straight into it.
Okay, so it wouldn't be the cardiac cycle without the main player, the heart, and that's where we're going to start off here. So I just want you to have a really good appreciation of different structures of the heart to begin with. So we've got our chambers, right? You got your atria and you got your ventricles, right? And you got them on the right and the left. Again, note, they flipped it, yeah? So on my right hand side is the left atrium, on my left hand side is the right atrium, etc. Yeah. So those are your chambers. Another really important thing I want you to appreciate, these vessels. We have arteries. As we learned in our last videos, our arteries take blood away from the heart, and we have our veins that are going to bring blood to the heart. Yeah. And final thing that I also want to note is we have valves. So you've got valves on the right and the left. Right. These are also really important. Your septum, lost color here. Your septum is like a wall that separates the different sides of the heart. So it separates mostly the ventricles, but is between the atria as well. But it just separates the right side from the left side. Happy days. Now, another really important thing in terms of the structure of the heart that I want us to appreciate is going to be this. We have different types of valves. So on this diagram, it just says heart valves, yeah? But we have atrioventricular valves, as you can guess, between the atria and your ventricle. We're going to put a dot to show these. Your atrioventricular valves are here and here, right? And then your semilunar valves, we're going to do in green. Your semilunar valves are going to be here and here. Okay, hope that's clear. Now, you just need to be able to name these as well. So for semilunar valves, I think it's quite easy. Your pulmonary valve on the right, your pulmonary valve is literally where you're going to go to the pulmonary artery, whereas your aortic valve is going to be where you're going to, on the left side, where you're going into the aorta, yeah? And then in terms of your atrioventricular valves, I use this a little way of remembering it. Sorry about that. I use a little way of remembering it, yeah? So right tricuspid, right trigger. Say you're on the PlayStation, you're on Xbox, your right trigger, right tricuspid valve. And the left bicuspid, I'm going to say pounds. The symbol for pounds, LBS. So just LB, left bicuspid. Just know, street name for the left bicuspid valve is going to be the mitral valve. So it can go by both. So just be aware of that. Okay, so now we've done a bit of the preliminary work. We're going to go into the phases of the cardiac cycle. But first of all, what actually is a cardiac cycle, right? A cardiac cycle is going to be the events that occur in a single complete heartbeat involving the different pressure and volume changes. We're going to get into that a load. Cool. Let's think about this. So atrial systole. So the first stage is atrial systole. It's in a cycle, remember. So we're going to repeat on ourselves. So atrial systole, I want you to remember, systole means contraction. So this is contraction of your atria. Now, when pressure inside of your atria is greater than pressure inside of the ventricles, again, we're relating back to mass flow. Our blood's going to want to flow into the ventricles, right? Cool. Your AV valves need to be forced open for that to happen. So when your atria contract like that, they're going to force the AV valves open so that blood can flow from the atria to the ventricle. Think back to the diagram that we had, yeah? During this whole process, your semilunar valves are closed. Cool. Let's look at ventricular systole, the next stage. So ventricular systole, again, systole, contraction. So contraction of your ventricles. Now, ventricular systole is actually split up into two different steps. So the first one is isovolumetric contractions, right? So we're going to have contraction of your ventricles, yeah? And that's going to build up the pressure. So the pressure in the ventricle is going to go higher than the pressure in the atria, right? When this happens, again, mass flow. Where's the blood going to want to move? The blood's going to want to move down the pressure gradient to the lower pressure, which is in the atria. So your AV valves need to close, right? Your AV valves close to prevent the backflow of blood. Cool. Once that happens, it means that your ventricles can continue to contract. Remember, the semilunar valves are still closed, right? So your ventricles are contracting. They're building up the pressure because they're contracting, but the volume actually isn't changing because the blood has nowhere to go. Remember, AV valve is closed. Semilunar valve is also closed, yeah? Next stage of ventricular systole. So like we said, it's in two stages. The next one is going to be ventricular ejection. Cool. We've had those isovolumetric contractions. We've built up pressure inside of the ventricles. And now the pressure in the ventricle exceeds the pressure in the artery. Remember, artery, not atria. Artery. Cool. When the pressure in the ventricle is higher than the pressure in the artery, where's the blood going to want to go? Right? Blood wants to go down the pressure gradient into the artery. Cool. So your semilunar valves need to open for that to happen, and the blood can flow through the ventricles into the artery. Happy days. Our final stage of the cardiac cycle is going to be cardiac diastole. Yeah, diastole, or diastole, relaxation. Cool. So this is just the heart relaxing. Now, the pressure in the arteries is now greater than the pressure in the ventricles because the blood's flowing into it. So where does the blood want to go? Right? Blood wants to come back into the ventricle because it's lower pressure. So your semilunar valves need to close to prevent that backflow of blood. Now, you're going to follow your normal cycle. So we did the circulatory system, I believe, in the previous video. But it's going to follow that, where it's going from the artery, either to your systemic or your lung capillaries, right, back to your veins, back into the atria. Cool. When blood's flowing into the atria, the pressure in the atria is going to build up. Yeah. And what this allows for, when you have blood coming into the atria, pressure's getting higher, your AV valves actually can leak. So you're going to have this passive ventricular filling because your AV valves are leaking a bit of blood into the ventricles, right? And that is then going to bring us back to a point where we've got sustained blood coming into the atria, which is going to mean eventually the pressure in the atria exceeds pressure in the ventricle. Atria contract, we've started the cycle again. Especially for my SNAB people out there, we could not go through this whole video without talking about this diagram. I'm not entirely sure about other examples, but I know for SNAB especially, this diagram is so important. You need to be so happy with it. So we're going to break it down. We've got pressure in the aorta. So think about the left side of the heart. So this is the artery. We've got atrial pressure in yellow. We've got ventricular pressure in blue. Right. We've also got ventricular volume in pink. And then to be honest, I don't really care about these ones for you now. Yeah. Right now, I don't really care about those. Cool. Let's have a look at this. So, again, we're going to start with atrial systole. Cool. You can see at this point, the pressure, let's make sure we circle everything. I'll use purple. See here, the pressure in the atria, the yellow line, is greater than the pressure inside of the ventricle. Hence, we want blood flow into the ventricle. You can see here, actually, I might even drawn the dot too early. See how pressure is higher here? You can see how we start to get an increase in volume of your ventricle because blood's going to come into the ventricle. Yeah? Makes sense. Cool. Then, here you get to a point where the mitral valve closes. That must mean that the pressure in the ventricle, at this point, the pressure in the ventricle has now exceeded the pressure in the atria, which is why you're going to have the closure of that mitral valve, which is also the left bicuspid valve. Yeah? Okay. Let's look at this. Until this dotted line, you can see here, the pressure in the ventricle is rising, right? Pressure in the ventricle is rising, but you can also see there's no change in the volume. Those are your isovolumetric contractions. Cool. Let's keep on going across. At this point here, we can see that the pressure in the ventricle exceeds the pressure in the artery, the aorta. Hence, your aortic valve is going to open, right? Let's highlight that. Your aortic valve is going to open because the pressure in the ventricle is higher than the pressure in the artery. Cool. And also highlight this stuff about the mitral valve as well. Cool. Now, this is your ventricular ejection stage. So you can see here, if we go down, you can see the volume inside of the ventricle is falling. The volume in the ventricle is falling because blood is going out of the ventricle into the artery. Cool. And you can see that's corresponded by an increase in the arterial pressure. Now, at this point here, the pressure in the artery is now greater than the pressure in the ventricle. Hence, the aortic valve needs to close because the blood wants to go back into the ventricle because the pressure in the artery is higher. Cool? And then you can also see now the ventricles aren't contracting, blood's not coming into the ventricle. You can see the pressure is really falling. The pressure starts to fall, right? And then when the pressure is falling, eventually, the pressure in the atria will be greater again. We can open up that mitral valve. Yeah? So we open up that mitral valve, and then you can see passive filling of the ventricles. The ventricle starts to increase in volume because we're starting to fill it. And then we're going to repeat the cycle again. I hope that all makes sense. It's really important that we know that diagram. If you need to, listen back to what I've just said. I know I do have a tendency to speak fast. I've tried to explain it as best as I can. So have a read of that again. Have a listen to that again. Really try to be happy with this graph because it's so important. And then you can see it as a cycle. This whole thing just repeats again. If anything, this is something that you might revisit again. I believe it's topic 7 potentially. But you're going to revisit this again in A-level. I just wanted to do a brief introduction for what you would need to know in AS. So, heart rate is going to be the number of heartbeats in a minute, right? And you can normally calculate that via 60, which is the number of seconds in a minute, divided by the duration of a cardiac cycle. So let's look at an example. Let's say we have one cardiac cycle lasting 0.8 seconds. I would do 60 divided by 0.8, right? And if I quickly pop that into my calculator, we're going to get 75 beats per minute. That's my heart rate. Happy days. Just understand that. That's pretty much all you need to know about calculating heart rate. And I'll just add an additional point. Less than 60 is going to be too low. And that's the phenomenon we call bradycardia. Greater than 100 is too high. And we call that tachycardia. Again, that's going to be more of a focus in the actual A level. For AS, just be aware of that. Now, there's another formula that we need to appreciate. Cardiac output is equal to the heart rate times stroke volume. Literally, in an exam, they might just ask you to put some numbers into this formula and work it out. But just know, the cardiac output is the volume of blood leaving the left ventricle in a minute. And the stroke volume is the volume of blood leaving the left ventricle in each heartbeat. Just be aware of the difference between that. So stroke volume each heartbeat, cardiac output each minute. Yeah? That is kind of all I wanted to cover with this. Okay, and now it's question time. So you've got 3 questions to do there. The first one, the first 2 you're just looking at the question. The next one, I want you to pay really close attention to the diagram. Try and use the knowledge that we have and tell me what stage of the cardiac cycle we are in there. I'll give you a couple seconds, or give yourself as much time as you need. Pause the video to answer. Okay, hope you had a really good go at those questions, and here are the answers. So, the atrioventricular valves need to close during ventricular systole to prevent the backflow of blood into the atria. Right? Again, we're relating it back to the principle of mass flow that we learned earlier. Blood wants to flow down the pressure gradient to where there's lower pressure. So this is why we need valve closures, to prevent that backflow of blood. Or else we're not going to get blood to our lungs or to the rest of our body. Right? The semilunar valves, when do they open? They open when ventricular pressure is higher than pressure in the aorta, so that they can allow that blood to go into the artery. Yeah? Again, stuff we've covered. Is just about relaying that now that you have a question in front of you. Let's go for that. Now, the answer to this was ventricular systole. You can zoom into the diagram here. So why was it ventricular systole? You can see here, I've circled in green, that the atrioventricular valves are closed. Right? If the atrioventricular valves are closed, we can already assume that atrial systole has occurred. And you can see that the semilunar valves are actually open. That would tell you that a ventricular ejection is about to occur. Right? So the pressure in the ventricle must be higher than the pressure in the arteries, which is why we're allowing blood to come out. I hope that makes sense. Okay, and finally, we're on to the A-star tips. Now, I cannot stress how important that graph is. Guys, please, if there's one thing, please learn that graph, especially if you're doing SNAB. Yeah. Also, just know the names and positions of each valve. It's a simple 1 marker. If they ask you to name a heart valve, just name it, know what side it's on. I promise you, it's not that difficult to learn, and it's just an easy mark that you don't want to miss out. I would also say the cardiac cycle does more complicated processes in this biology specification. So I think being able to go through all of this, and whilst you're explaining it, relate to changes in pressure, relate to changes in volume, that's going to really help you to score marks when it comes on the exam. And just also know why valves close as well. So the valves are closing to prevent that backflow of blood. Really important to say. Now, what should you not do? These are more kind of minor things that you can just make sure that you don't fall into that trap, right? Confusing systole with diastole. Yeah, a lot of people do it. A lot of people do it. Just remember, systole contraction, diastole relax. Cool. Mixing up the right and the left. You wouldn't be surprised. A lot of people might say left tricuspid valve, or they might say right bicuspid valve. Again, that's mixing up the direction that it's in. So it's always right tricuspid, right trigger, left bicuspid, pounds. Do not mix those up, because it can really happen. Also, another thing, don't mix up the right side of the heart with the left side of the heart. Really, really easy to assume this is my right, so that must be the right side of the heart. It is not. Yeah, you flip it over. Also, again, I'm stressing the diagram. Please go into the exam knowing how to interpret that diagram. Please, 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 just for me. It will really help you out. Okay, I really hope this lesson has been useful. Please subscribe, like, drop any questions in the comments. I'll do my best to answer. And I'll catch you in the next one. Bye for now.